Tell us a joke.
In 1951, Warner Brothers cut this film twice and told the director about only one of them. Roughly 4 minutes went into a can. The can went onto a shelf for 42 years. 15 deleted scenes, forced changes, and buried decisions in order, with every source named. Number 1, censored twice, restored once. Start with the thing almost every retelling of this story gets wrong. A Streetcar Named Desire was not censored once. It was censored twice by 2 different organizations at 2 different moments for 2 entirely different reasons. The first round happened in 1950 in an office before the cameras rolled. Hollywood's own censorship body went through the script for roughly 6 months and forced changes onto the page. The second round happened in 1951 after the film was finished, scored, and approved. A Catholic organization with no legal authority whatsoever got roughly 4 more minutes cut out of a picture the industry's own censors had already passed. In 1993, Warner Brothers put the second round back and sold it as the original director's version. The first round has never been restored. Not in 1993. Not since. It is baked into every copy of this film that exists. Keep that in mind as we count. Number 2, 6 months before a frame was shot, the Production Code Administration was not the government. The studios had built it themselves in the 1930s to police their own content before anybody else did it for them, and by 1950, it was run by Joseph Breen. No major American cinema would show a film without its seal. So in practice, the Code Office read your script and you did what it said. Warner Brothers and the Code Office spent roughly 6 months on this one, not a note or two. 6 months on a play that had already won the Pulitzer Prize and was still running on Broadway. 3 things were unacceptable to them. The reason for the death of Blanche's husband, the language around Blanche's own past, and the scene the entire story turns on. None of that was an editing room decision. It happened on the page, in an office, before Marlon Brando had stood in front of a camera. Number 3, the husband's death removed permanently. In Tennessee Williams's play, Blanche's young husband takes his own life after she discovers he is in a relationship with another man and says something to him she can never take back. That is the wound the whole character is built on. Everything Blanche does afterwards runs back to it. The code did not permit it to be stated on screen, so it was taken out. What is left is a film about a woman whose collapse rests on a cause the audience is never told. The dialogue that made Blanche's own past explicit went the same way. What survives is implication, and viewers in 1951 were expected to fill in the rest themselves. And here is the part to hold on to. Neither of those changes came back in 1993. They were never on film in the first place. There is nothing to restore. Number 4, the ending was rewritten. In the play, Stella stays. She hears what her sister says about Stanley, and she does not believe it, or she cannot afford to believe it, and she stays with him. The code did not allow that. A man could not do what Stanley does and keep his life intact. The rulebook required that wrongdoing be seen to carry a cost. So the ending changed. In the film, Stella takes her baby and goes up the stairs to the neighbors, and we are left to understand that she is not coming back. That is not a trim. That is a rewrite. And a rewrite cannot be undone later with a pair of scissors. The 1993 version ends exactly the way the 1951 version ends, because there is no alternative ending sitting in a vault. It was never shot. Number 5. The scene Kazan reportedly refused to lose. The Code Office wanted the assault removed entirely. By the accounts of that negotiation, and this comes from later histories rather than from a document written at the time, this is where Elia Kazan stopped moving. His position was that without it, the film had no ending worth filming, and that he would not make it. He got a compromise, and it cost him. The scene could stay, but it could not be shown, described, or named. What is actually on screen is a broken mirror and a cutaway to the street. That is the entire depiction. The film asks its audience to understand something it is not permitted to say out loud. It is worth sitting with what that compromise produced. One of the most consequential scenes in American cinema exists on screen only as an implication. And there are 10 numbers still to come, including the one cut that was not a picture cut at all. Number 6. It had the seal, then the Legion saw it. The production code office approved the finished picture. It had the seal, it was cut, scored, and scheduled for release. Then the Legion of Decency saw it. The Legion was not a government body, and it was not part of the studio system. It was a Catholic lay organization that rated films for its own members, and its power was entirely commercial. A condemned rating meant millions of American Catholics were instructed not to buy a ticket. For a picture this size, that was a serious financial threat, and everyone involved knew it. By the account in the Library of Congress essay on the film's soundtrack, the preview cut was heading for exactly that rating. So, we are now looking at a second censorship, run by an organization with no legal power at all, applied to a film that the industry's own censors had already passed. Number 7. Not the American print. Everywhere, the Legion made Warner Brothers an offer. Make the cuts we want, and give us a commitment that the recut print is the only version released anywhere in the world, and the rating becomes B. Morally objectionable in part, but not forbidden. Read that condition again, because it decides everything that happens afterwards. Not the American release, not the domestic print, anywhere in the world. Warner took the deal. The film opened in September 1951 with a B rating, and it was a hit. 12 Academy Award nominations, 4 wins. The first time a single film had ever taken 3 of the acting awards. Reported grosses varied between roughly $4 and $8 million in North America, against a budget of under $2 million. So the censorship cost Warner Brothers nothing at the box office. It cost the director his cut and nothing else. Number 8. Quigley, Weisbart, and an empty chair. Jack Warner ordered the film's editor, David Weisbart, to recut it. Supervising those cuts on the Legion's side was Martin Quigley, a trade paper publisher who 20 years earlier had helped write the production code itself. So the co-author of the rulebook was now trimming a film that the office enforcing that rulebook had already cleared. That is how far outside the official system this second round sat. Kazan was not consulted. He was not in the building. He found out after it had been done. This is the fact that separates this story from the usual one about studio interference. It was not a producer overruling a director. It was an outside religious organization working through the studio, recutting a finished and approved film, and the man supervising had written the rules the film had already been cleared under. Number 9, roughly 4 minutes, nobody agrees. This is where we have to be honest about a figure that gets repeated with far more confidence than it deserves. Warner's own home video packaging says 3 minutes. The film quarterly account says 4 scattered minutes. Roger Ebert, reviewing the restoration in 1993, wrote about 5. All 3 numbers are in print, from sources that ought to know. We will say roughly 4 minutes, and we will say plainly that the exact figure is disputed. What matters more is what kind of material it was. There is no missing scene here, no lost subplot, no alternative reel. It is a few seconds in one place and a few seconds in another, and almost all of it concerns what the characters wanted rather than what they did. Which is precisely why it is so easy to underestimate, and precisely why it changes the film as much as it does. Number 10, The Staircase. The single most famous cut is The Staircase. Stanley has beaten his wife, he stands in the street below and shouts for her, and Stella comes down the stairs to him. In the 1951 release, she comes down, and that is roughly all you get. In the restored version, you get the look on her face before she reaches him, held long enough that there is no mistaking what it is. The other significant trims sit at the opposite end of the picture. Moments in the very first meeting between Blanche and Stanley, and lines that made Blanche's past explicit rather than implied. Put them together and the film reads differently. Without them, Stanley is a man who loses control once, at the end. With them, the film has told you in the opening reel what he is capable of and what Stella already knows. And her walk down that staircase becomes a great deal harder to watch. Number 11, The Cut You Can Hear. One of the cuts was not a picture cut at all. Alex North's score for this film is one of the first genuinely jazz-driven scores in American cinema. Jazz used as dramatic underscoring rather than as something a band happens to be playing in the next room. The staircase sequence is where that music does its heaviest work. And the Legion objected to it. Not to a line, not to a shot. To the scoring, which it described as lustful and carnal. The complaint was that the music was telling the audience what the scene was actually about, so the music changed. According to the Library of Congress essay on the soundtrack, North was required to replace the cue. Accounts differ on exactly which solo line was pulled. Some say saxophone, some say clarinet, but the effect is not in dispute. The sensuous writing underneath Stella's descent was replaced with something cooler and more mournful. A censor listened to a piece of orchestral music and correctly identified it as the most explicit thing in the scene. He was not wrong. That is what the cue was doing. Number 12, Kazan went public. Kazan then did something directors of that era almost never did. He went public. In October 1951, he published a piece in the New York Times about what had been done to his film. It ran under the title Pressure Problem on the 21st of that month. He described the studio's reaction to the threatened rating as panic, a large investment that they had suddenly been told no Catholic would buy a ticket for. Theaters picketed, priests in the lobby writing down the names of parishioners who went in. Whether that picture was literally accurate or a director's version of a very bad month, it is what he put his name to at the time, and putting his name to it was the unusual part. Directors under contract did not publicly attack the handling of their own studio's biggest release of the year. He had already lost the argument by then. The film was in cinemas in the recut version. Number 13. Both versions, then Venice refused twice. This is the part of the story that usually gets left out entirely. Kazan did not demand that the cuts be reversed. He knew the studio would not risk the rating. What he proposed instead was that Warner Brothers release both versions at the same time, label them clearly, and let audiences decide which one to buy a ticket for. Warner said no, so he tried a second route. Screen his version at the Venice Film Festival, outside the United States, outside the Legion's constituency, in front of a festival audience rather than a general one. Warner said no again, and by then it could not have said anything else, because the deal that bought the B rating covered every release, everywhere. One screening in Italy would have broken it. There is a bitter footnote to that. The film did travel to Venice that year, in the approved version, and it took a special jury prize. The cut Kazan wanted shown there is the one that stayed home. Number 14. A routine inventory. In 1993, somebody at Warner Brothers was counting what was on the shelves. Not a search, not a restoration project, an inventory. That is how the missing material was found, sitting in storage, uncatalogued 42 years after it was taken out. And the reason it could be put back at all comes down to how David Weisbart had worked in 1951. Michael Eric, who ran the 1993 reissue, told the Los Angeles Times that the editor had removed the trims in a way that would make them straightforward to reinstate, as though he expected somebody, eventually, to want them back. Warner assembled a new version, put it into cinemas and then onto home video, and sold it on the recovered minutes. Kazan was in his 80s by then. He was still alive to see it. 42 years after he had asked for exactly this, and been turned down twice. Number 15, you can see the joins. This is the detail that makes this particular restoration worth watching rather than just reading about. The recovered elements were never brought up to match the rest of the picture. The film around them is sharp, stable, properly graded. The restored seconds are scratched, contrasty, and visibly deteriorated. They arrive on screen and they announce themselves. For most restorations, that would be a failure. Here it is, the most useful thing about the release. Nobody has to point at the screen and tell you which frames spent 42 years in a can. The picture tells you. The damage is the evidence. It also means something slightly uncomfortable. You can sit and watch precisely the boundary of what an outside organization with no legal power was able to remove from a major American motion picture, and how little it took. Which brings us to the correction. On this channel, the correction is the point. Warner Brothers released the 1993 version as the original director's version, and that is still how it is sold. It is not. What came back was the second round. Roughly 4 minutes of trims, plus a piece of music, removed by the Legion of Decency after the industry's own censors had already approved the film. What did not come back was the first round, the reason Blanche's husband died, the language around her past, the ending. Those were taken on the page in 1950. They were never filmed. There is nothing in any vault to recover. So the version sold as Kazan's original is, more accurately, the version the production code office had already signed off on. That is a real thing to have back. It is not the same as an unmediated original. A film censored twice is not restored by undoing one of them. If you want more of this, the cuts, the versions, and the difference between what was written, what was filmed, and what survives the channel is here.